Good evening, everybody. My name's Rob Miller, and I'm going to be hosting tonight's meeting. We're going to give everybody just one more minute before we start. I know there's nearly 100 people who have joined us so far, but there are more people joining us as we speak. So we'll come back in about 1 minute's time to start the meeting. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Rob Miller, as I said a moment ago. I'm very pleased to be here this evening. I'm the director of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign here in the UK, and I'm going to chair tonight's meeting. This is the second in our series of meetings on breaking the blockade.
Rob, just hold on 1 second. We're having a bit of an issue with the stream. Just we'll start again in a couple of minutes. We'll try and fix it.
Oh.
Second.
Streaming is on.
Can people see me, Ryan, or hear me? Do you know?
It's flashing in and out. I'm just trying to fix it. 1 second.
Apparently people can hear me, Ryan. I think we've got a few technical issues, but I think I'm getting messages that people can hear us okay. So I'm going to start the meeting, I think. Is that okay with you, Ryan?
Yeah, you I think go for it, but
okay. Well, I'm really sorry about the faulty start, everybody. We've had a few technical issues with the live streaming, which was going in and out, but I understand from lots of people that you can see and hear us. So I'm really pleased that you've hung on in there to join us tonight. I know we've got up to around about 100 people signed up already, and a few more joining us as we speak, but we'll get started straight away. My name's Rob Miller. I'm the director of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign here in the UK, and I'm chairing tonight's meeting. This is the second in our Breaking the Blockade series, which have been organised to really explore the blockade, what it means to the people of Cuba, in the run-up to this year's United Nations vote, which will take place on the 23rd of June this year. And we're really delighted to welcome María del Carmen Herrera Caseiro, who's the Acting General Director of Multilateral Affairs and International Law at Cuba's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, MINREX, who joins us tonight live from Havana in Cuba. And María is going to talk to us about the most recent report of the Cuba's report to the United Nations, which accompanies the annual vote on the issue, and also to talk about how the blockade has impacted on the people of Cuba over the past 18 months as a result of US policy and, of course, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. I'd really like to welcome all of you here tonight, all our viewers on YouTube. I'm sure many of you know that the US blockade means that people in Cuba are unable to use Zoom. It's not available on the island due to the blockade. So we're using another platform. So we have a live link up with Havana, and then we're streaming that live meeting to YouTube. So we are live now. It also means people across Cuba can view the meeting on YouTube, which is great. So welcome to everybody tonight. Do, if you get the chance, click the like button on YouTube, subscribe to our channels, and share this live stream, because it means more people join us, and it's a way of helping build solidarity with Cuba at this time. I'd also like to welcome, I know she's not a formal panelist, but I know she's watching here tonight, Her Excellency Barbara Montalvo Alvarez, the Cuban ambassador to the UK, who's watching tonight. Welcome, Barbara. So just to go through the format quickly, I'm going to be asking Maria a number of questions, including quite a few that we've received in advance from people who have pre-registered. And if there's time, we'll also be taking some questions from people who post them in the chat box tonight. We want the meeting to last around an hour, so we aim to finish at 7:30 at the latest. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome once again Maria del Carmen for joining us here tonight. We're incredibly lucky and honoured that you've been able to find the time to join us live from Havana. I know this is an incredibly busy time for MINREX, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as you are getting ready for the upcoming United Nations vote. So welcome, Maria, to the meeting. And the very first question is a straightforward one. Could you tell us a little bit about the background to this year's Cuba, the report that you're sending to the United Nations, and what period of time does that report cover? Maria, over to you.
Yes, good evening. Good evening, Rob, in the UK. It's good afternoon in the Havana, and thank you very much for inviting me to take part of this conversation regarding the blockade imposed by the United States against Cuba. We are really very grateful to the solidarity and all friends of Cuba all around the world that have been tirelessly supporting Cuba all this year. Coming to your questions, if you allowed me, I would like to explain just a little about the situation around the report. You know that Cuba's report has been presented since 1993, and then this report constitutes the Cuba's contribution to a report that is prepared by the Secretary General of the United Nations to be considered by the General Assembly. It should be noted that by virtue of the resolution that is adopted every year since 1992, there is a mandate by which the Secretary General have to prepare this report, and in doing so, he has to consult all member states of the United Nations and also international organizations such as agency, funds, and programs of the United Nations system. So, the Cuba's report is our own national contribution and our response to this request of the Secretary General. I would like to call your attention that, or to highlight that there should be a high number of contributions. I remember, just to give you an idea, in 1993, when for the first time it was introduced a report by the Secretary General, he received only 34 contributions from states, member states of the UN, and international organizations, of course, including the Cuba's one. And then year after year, this number has been increasing constantly. Then from 2007, those contributions reached the number of more than 100. And since the recent year, including 2020, this contribution has reached the number of more than 190 contributions. That can give you the idea of the importance of the report of the Secretary General and the importance that is granted by the international community to the issue of the blockade imposed against Cuba. Almost all the governments and international organizations tribute to this report of the Secretary General. Now, as you know, traditionally, the resolution has been adopted in the main session of the United Nations General Assembly. Normally takes place in October or November. Then, after the adoption of the resolution, the following year, in March, April, the Secretary General sent the request to member states and the international organization. And then he normally gave a deadline for the submission of such a contribution, which is until May or April. And then from there, he prepared his report to be presented in October, which is normally published in September. So the Cuba's report or contribution this year has followed this kind of calendar. It means that our report, the one that we presented and have been already published by the Secretary General, covers the period between April 2019 and March 2020. Then, because of the restricted measures and the situation generated by the COVID pandemic, the consideration of the report as well as of the resolution was postponed till the 23rd of June this year. And then I would like to say that we are working now in the preparation of a kind of addendum to the Secretary General's report, or to the Cuba's report as a contribution to the other one, which will cover the period from April 2020 to December 2020, in order to give all the examples of the application of the blockade during all these periods. So, to sum up, we are going to have on the 23rd of June a report from April 2019 till March 2020, and an addendum from April 2020 to December 2020. So that's my comment. I hope it's understandable, because there are many problems with dates and deadlines.
No, that's perfect, Maria. Thank you so much for explaining it. I know it's been a difficult process because of the delay with COVID. So, of course, we are very keen to see the update, the addendum, as you called it. For people who are watching, we will put on the chat now a link to Cuba's report, which covers up until March 2020. We haven't yet got the addendum, but as soon as we get that, we will also publish that. But you can see from the report, which is on our website and in the chat now, that you can there read the extent of the application of the blockade over that period. Now, Maria, in the last 12 months since the report was published, there have also been an additional around about 90 new measures imposed from the United States, from the Trump administration primarily, against Cuba. And there was also, in the last days almost of the Trump administration, the addition of Cuba to the United States so-called list of state sponsors of terrorism, adding Cuba to that list. Could you tell us some of the key findings of your report to the United Nations this year? And also, secondly, could you also say a little bit about what it means for Cuba being added to the state sponsor of terrorism list, and how that exacerbates and makes the problem worse with the blockade?
Yes, Rob, thank you. Yeah, the Cuban report has been presented, both. Let me tell you first that the addendum is supposed to be ready by the 3rd of June, I mean next week. And be sure I will share, I mean, with you and all friends as soon as we have it translated. So the report has been presented in the context, and it's easy to know that, of a progressive reinforcement of the blockade against Cuba. And the numerous of regulation and provisions, issued by the U.S. government against Cuba reach an unprecedented, and I would like to emphasize this word, unprecedented levels of hostility. Let me tell you that during the administration of the former president, Donald Trump, it was, he imposed at about or more than 240 unilateral coercive measures against Cuba. And those measures don't constitute simple coercion actions, but also they were new methods, some of them unparalleled, that escalated the economic war against Cuba to extreme levels, which is reflected in the material shortage that accompanied the daily life of every Cuban. So, as you rightly said, the period that covers the report already published, at about 90 new measures were issued by the then US government. But during 2020, there are more than 55 new measures issued by the government of the United States, mostly in the context, as this year has been also this one, but has been the year of the COVID pandemic. So it shows the real inhuman nature of social policy against Cuba. So just to mention a few of the most harmful examples that included them in the report. First, we have the activation or the total activation of Title III of the Helms-Burton Act from May 2019 for the first time in 23 years. You remember that it was adopted in 1996. So this opened the possibility of taking action in US courts against, for example, foreign investors in Cuba or to all other person wishing doing business with Cuba. So then we have another measures was the suspension of all US flights from the United States to Cuba, with the exception of the airport of Havana, the international airport of Havana, Jose Marti. It means that all the flights were canceled to the other 9 international airports that we have in our country. So it's easy to imagine how such a measure damaged, not only in terms of economic costs, because of incomes we cannot receive for this concept, but mostly the human impact, the impact on the people, that, the lack of flights impacting their possibility to travel. You know, we have the biggest Cuban community abroad live in the United States. So all these flights just used to benefit people from both sides to visit it, to meeting, families, relatives, friends. And it has become particularly difficult for the people of Cuba due to the lack of the suspension of such a flight, mostly for people living in other provinces of our country. But at the same times, the US decided also to eliminate all charter flights, again with the exception of those to the international airport in Havana. But they limited the number of flights to this airport. So it's a really harmful measure and very inhuman from my point of view. We have also one of the, the hardest measures imposed by the US government was the persecution and intimidation of companies that used to transport fuel to Cuba. Particularly alarming was the package of 5 measures adopted in 2019 to monitor and impose punitive measures against companies, ships, insurers, and shipping companies that used to transport fuel to Cuba. In this regard, I can tell you that illegitimate sanctions were imposed against 27 companies, 54 vessels, and 3 individuals linked to the sectors. None of them subject to the U.S. jurisdiction, none of them of U.S. origin. Then, another really tough measure I would like to raise was the creation of the so-called list of restricted Cuban entities, which has been updated year after year with the inclusion of more entities every time. The existence of this list has a very negative consequence for Cuba due to the deterrence and intimidating effect on foreign counterparts, and even push or stop some of the continuation of some of the operation carried out by foreign companies and individuals with those entities, Cuban entities, that have been included in the so-called restricted list of entities, the blacklist. So it harms really the possibility for Cuba to carry out operation and business with a third person in other countries. I don't know. There are a lot of, I told you, there were more than 240 and around 90 just in the period we are talking about. But we have also measures regarding the very hard restriction on remittances that impact directly the daily life of the Cuban people. Most of them, depend of this kind of support from their family, to have a better life in the context of the difficult situations that we are facing in Cuba because of the blockade. So I would like just to mention another one, which is also, a proof or that shows the inhuman character of all these measures, that is the discredit campaign carried out by the United States against the Cuban Medical Corporation. Come on, this is a crime, because Cuba has spared no efforts in order to support, other country, and we are not a rich country, and well, we have this solidarity vocation, and we share just a little we have, and then the U.S. started a campaign to discredit this kind of cooperation. So this is very immoral measures, not in terms of cost or income. It's not about that. It's about the immoral character of such a measure. And as you rightly mentioned, one of the last development was the inclusion of Cuba in the spurious list of states sponsor of terrorism. And let me tell you that it aggravated considerably the impact of the blockade on Cuba, because being in that list has a very deterrent and intimidating effects on others. Just to quote an example, a quick sample of this impact is a dozen of banks has closed or canceled operation with Cuba. And so, fortunately, this inclusion in the so-called list of state sponsor of terrorism has been rejected all around the world, even inside the United States. And I think that the U.S. government should be morally, forced to take out Cuba from this justice police list. So this is my comments. I can quote, if we are going to talk about numbers, just a quick reference. The cost or the damage of the blockade during the period covered by the report has been of more than $5,500 million. just in 1 year. This is just from April 2019 to March 2020. We don't have here, not yet, the amount, the amount of damage that represent during the period after April 2020. And we don't quantify either here the amount or the cost of the, the struggle against COVID pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So those are my comments. And if you ask me about key finding, I would like to add the key issue of the most recent period. I would like to say that the main finding is that the US government choose to take advantage of the COVID pandemic to reinforce its economic coercive measures against Cuba.
Okay, Maria, I'm going to ask you in a second about the effects on the health sector. So bear with me 1 second. But thank you so much for that very broad and wide-ranging explanation on how the blockade particularly affects Cubans on the island, but also their friends and relatives in the United States, because many of the measures are breaking the ability of families to connect between Cuba and the United States. So remittances, travel, they're all impacting on the ability of people to maintain family relations. And I think that is, when you say it's a humanitarian issue, you can see very much how hurtful and dangerous that actually is. Just to say for everybody, we have well over 100 people watching now. So I'm really pleased. And I want to welcome people from all across the world. We've got people from Sweden, from the United States, Santa Cruz, from Germany, Ireland. We've got somebody, a Cuban living in St. Petersburg, a Cuban living in Washington. So welcome to all of you across the world who are watching, and also across the UK, people in Ramsgate, Northampton, Brighton, Edinburgh, in Scotland, Rochester, and so on. So thank you to everybody who's joining us, and we're having a number of questions coming in as well. So thank you to all of you. So Maria, you spoke about the blockade in its generality, but if we could really focus in on one area, which I know people are anxious about and concerned about, which is how the blockade is impacting particularly on Cuba right now, particularly in the health sector. Because with the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, it's a very, very worrying situation for people across the globe, and people are watching the increase in numbers in Cuba at this time. So perhaps you could say a little bit about how the blockade and the Trump measures in particular have impacted on your ability as a country to be able to fight the virus and indeed respond to the virus, particularly with the vaccine rollout, which I know you're working very hard on now. If you could say a bit about the blockade and COVID in particular in the health sector, that would be great.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Rob. And I join you in welcome all the people as it's connected right now in our conversation. Yeah, I wish I could, fulfill all their expectations with this, this conversation. But yeah, coming to the health sector, I think that everybody is aware that public health is among the top priorities for the Cuban government. And despite the efforts we made to guarantee access to free and quality healthcare services, the blockade has a huge, tough impact in these sectors. Just to quote, a number. I like numbers. In the period that covers the report, the losses caused in the area, I mean, to the blockade, to the health sectors, amount over $160 million. And again, it doesn't include the damage during 2020, nor during the pandemic period. Cuba, is denied to the right to acquire technologies, raw materials, spare parts, diagnostic tools, medicines, and all the inputs related to these sectors. So not to having the right medicine or technology to provide due treatment to a disease at the time is needed to save a life. It carries a lot of pain for the patients, but also for the family and relative. So, and this kind of pain cannot be quantified. I just wanted to point it out that because in the case of the health sectors, we have the damage, the economic cost, but mostly the human costs. So I can quote some of the examples of the impact in these sectors during the COVID-19 pandemic. We have, many people have heard about the case of the donation made by the Chinese company Alibaba of mechanical pulmonary ventilator, diagnostic kits, masks, and other medical supply needed to confront the COVID-19. Well, this humanitarian aid couldn't arrive in Cuban territory because the transportation company denied to carry out to Cuba the cargo with the excuse that it cannot do that because of the blockade. But another regrettable example is the case of two Swiss companies that refused to deliver a high-tech mechanical pulmonary ventilators. Those two companies are considered leaders in the development and manufacture of such an equipment. And they have been having business with Cuba before. But what happened is that both of them were bought by U.S. Illinois company, and then they just stopped supplying these inputs to Cuba. But in the same line, we have cases of German companies that were regular Cuban suppliers of laboratory materials, where due to the intensification of the measures against Cuba and the persecution of the Cuban transaction, they decided to stop the provisions to Cuba in 2020, just at the time of the COVID pandemic. So you were asking about the vaccines. Well, we are really proud to say that we have been, working very hard. Not me, but Cuban scientists have been working very, very hard and to produce, and we now have 5 vaccines candidates. But it hasn't been so easy for them and for the country, because we have been denied access for 32 of the inputs needed, not just to produce the vaccines, but also to develop and carry out the medical trials. So there was a lacking, for example, of the purification of the vaccine equipment for the purification of the vaccine candidates, accessories for production equipment, filtration tanks, and other substance. I don't know how to pronounce in English, but potassium chloride solution, thimerosal, all these kind of things. We don't have access to them. And to have access, we have to go to intermediaries. And then it costs normally 60 or 60% more than their current price if you buy it from the direct manufacturers of those inputs. Then I would like to quickly mention another example. Very recently, in November 2020, that the U.S. Department of Transportation denied a request by ABC Airways and Skyway Enterprise to operate flights to Cuba carrying humanitarian cargo. they were denied the possibility to travel to Cuba with such a needed cargo. And the companies just say that because of the regulations of the US regulations, they cannot carry out that operation. So that is the situation. There are too many others examples of the impact, but I think I don't want to that people become bored because of all these explanations. I just want to highlight that despite of this shortage and limitation, the U.S. blockade could not break the basis of the Cuban health system, which is universal and free of charge. We have managed. We have made a lot of efforts in order to guarantee the application of protocols to all patients and cover all their expenses. We also managed to have free tests, a PCR, I don't know how to say it technically speaking, but they are for free here in Cuba. And also we have built our own mechanical pulmonary ventilator, and well, we have the 5 vaccine candidates.
It's a wonderful history of the health service in Cuba, and many friends watching tonight will have experienced the Cuban health service themselves, I'm sure. But we ourselves have been trying, along with friends around the world, to help, particularly at this time, Maria, as you know, and we spoke about it before the meeting. And many people here tonight will have donated to the appeals that we launched. There was an appeal at the start of the pandemic for the Cuban Health Service, which raised over £30,000. And we're in the middle of a second appeal right now to raise funds. And again, we have over £25,000 already. We've spent nearly 10,000 of that on a raw material for Cuba that was much needed, perhaps one that you mentioned, to help in the vaccine production. And right now we're talking to the Ministry of Health and the pharmaceutical organizations in Cuba about some buying cryotubes, which would carry the vaccine serums, and also syringes for the vaccine rollout. And we ourselves have got difficulties, obviously, transferring funds. We won't go into too many details, but I can assure everybody watching that that money is incredibly important and is helping immediately to provide much needed raw materials and equipment for the Cubans to carry out the full vaccination of their population over the next few months. So if you do want to help with the COVID appeal, there are links in the chat box now, or there should be now, and you can donate to that appeal, and every penny will be used to help the people of Cuba with the vaccination program, which is so essential at this time. And we're sure make use of that wonderful health service, that primary healthcare service that the Cubans have in place. But at the moment, they do need some help with financing in some of the particular products that are needed for that vaccine rollout. Okay, Maria, moving on. We've had a question from Wadsey Wordsworth, who has asked about environmental protection and what Cuba is doing to move towards self-sufficiency in terms of climate change and so on, and how the blockade is impacting on that. So I know, Maria, that Cuba has a long-term environmental plan called Tarea Vida or Project Life, which aims to implement strategies in the short and the long term to combat climate change. And could you tell us a little bit, I know it's mentioned in the report and has been for a number of years, how the blockade is impeding your efforts to fight climate change and build a sustainable Cuba, and how it's affecting you in terms of trying to reach those UN development goals, sustainable development goals, which are the targets for 2030. How is the blockade impacting your efforts to fight climate change and make sure that Cuba is sustainable?
Yes, Rob. First, allow me again to thank you. And if Cuba stands where we are right now, is also because the constant or permanent the tireless support coming from the friends of Cuba all around the world. So thank you so much. And coming to your questions, yes, the blockade impacts all sectors of the Cuban society and economy. I mean, you mentioned education, health, sports, social security, all these social sectors, but also impact the economic sectors. That is why is the main obstacles we are facing to develop our country and to reach the Agenda 2030 objective in this context. It's not difficult to understand why I'm saying that. If access to funding, technologies, spare parts, and essential inputs for the production is hampered, if to acquire the essential products and supplies, it is necessary to incur in enormous expenses due to the geographical relocation of trade or the use of intermediaries, which translated to a high amount of additional expenditure. If Cuban exports and the main sources of income for the country are blocked, if the transfers of funds for financing projects in the country are blocked, and if the acquisition fuel for production is prevented, causing almost the paralysis of key branches of our economy, if there is a fierce persecution of all sorts of income for Cuba, and if the activation of Title III of the Helms-Burton Act intimidate, potential foreign investors, bearing in mind that foreign investment is one of the key things for the economic development. And if Cuba is included in the spurious list of state sponsors of terrorists, which is another weapon to intimidate and stop transactions with Cuba, then in social conditions, Rob, it is really, really difficult, to advance in the economic development and to reach higher standard in social terms. So Cuba has a plan, the national plan for the economic and social development till 2030, which is exactly in line with the Agenda 2030 and its sustainable development goals. So the blockade is the main, for all these reasons I explained, it's the main obstacle to move forward these programs. You mentioned the Tarea Vida, which is the state plan, the Cuban state plan to tackle climate change. Well, it is a very, very ambitious plan. And it covers not only mitigation actions, but mostly adaptation actions, bearing in mind that Cuba is a small island developing state, which is especially vulnerable to the impact of the climate change. But let me tell you another thing. Very recently, Cuba, as part of the Paris Agreement, updated its national determined contribution with also very ambitious commitments in terms of mitigation and adaptation. So both of them, are moving forward. But the obstacles and the difficulties we are facing to fully implement this commitment, the plan Tarea Vida and also this new commitment under the Paris Agreement are really, huge. In fact, I don't know, we have time. There is the international instrument on climate change, in particular, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement, very clearly stated they have a disposition about the importance of granted means of implementation to developing countries in terms of funding, capacity building, and transfer of technology. It's a disposition. All state parties are forced to fulfill with that. Well, there is a kind of reluctance on the side of some industrialized countries to fulfill with this disposition. I mean, to provide this kind of means of implementation to developing countries, including the US. Well, you can imagine, together with that, we also have the burden of the blockade. So, I mean, it will be really difficult, although it has been implemented step by step and with a lot of efforts, but we will manage to do it. I would like to, now it comes to my mind to mention a couple of examples just to show, the people that are hearing us. And I mean, it is not contained in the report. It's regarding with the issue of climate change. In March 2020, the Green Climate Fund Board considered a joint project of the United Nations Agricultural and Food Program and Cuba. This program is directed to increase the climate resilience and sustainable development in 7 of the most vulnerable municipalities in Cuba. Well, let me tell you that 22 members of the board supported the project, and only the US delegation opposed it. So then we have March this year, a couple of months ago, again, the Green Climate Fund Board considered another joint program, project. In this case, it's Cuba with the, I don't remember right, with the United Nations Development Program. Sorry about that. And then again, 23, in this case, members of the board supported the project. And only the US voted against. And I am talking a couple of months ago, under the current US administration. So you can imagine the kind of hostile sentiments against Cuba. And those projects, for instance, the first one of last year would benefit directly more than 51,000 people, including 23,000 women, and also another 232,000 people that would receive indirect benefits. And then the second one is a project to restore all the coastal ecosystem along 1,300 kilometers, and would benefit 24 communities in our country, and more than 1 million people will going to be protected from saline intrusion and also from the floodings. Mm-hmm. So the US just voted against that. And do you know what was one of the arguments of this US delegation? It was that Cuba was in the list of state sponsor of terrorism. So you can imagine how the...
Thank you, Maria. It's always illuminating to hear firsthand how the United States carries out its policies in some of these international meetings, and we saw how the Trump administration pulled out of the climate, the Paris Agreement. So it's not it's not a huge surprise to hear about the United States' role in terms of the environment in Cuba. We are moving into, we have a limited amount of time, Maria. So I want to ask you specifically about one question that I think has cropped up before we look at the United States and their response to the blockade. Just one thing, in 2021, in April, the United States courts ruled that the US multinational oil company, ExxonMobil, could go ahead with its legal case against the Cuban government to sue the Cuban government under Title III, which you mentioned before, Title III of the Helms-Burton Act. And ExxonMobil are now claiming over 280 million US dollars from the Cuban government in lieu of oil refineries and petrol stations and so on, which were nationalized after the revolution. Can you, in your role from MinRex, and I know you have a legal portfolio also, could you tell us a little bit about how this situation came about, and also what is Cuba's views on these types of cases, particularly this one, but also these types of cases coming out of the United States under Title III?
Well, yes, Rob, the ExxonMobil demands is based, as you rightly say, in the the activation of Title III of the Helms-Burton Act, which is an imperialistic legislation adopted in 1996. This law allowed former owners, as I explained previously, of properties that were nationalized at the beginning of the Cuban Revolution to sue in the US courts the Cuban government on all those who had transactions or operation with such nationalized properties. So the ExxonMobil, like others, are using this legislation to present this kind of demand. Let me tell you that since its activation from May 2nd, 2019, 34 legal procedures has been introduced in the U.S. courts regarding properties, supposed properties in Cuba. So ExxonMobil is trying to take advantage of this law, but it seems it is not going to be so easy, because Cuba's nationalization process had been carried out in accordance with international law. So its demand doesn't have any ground. So let's see what would happen. I think it's important to highlight that, this nationalization formed part of a legitimate process of social and economic transformation after the triumph of the revolution, of the Cuban Revolution, which include this, the property regime. But it has to be, and I emphasize that, this process was carried out fully in accordance with the international law. But besides, the Cuban government compensate all those former owners of the properties, with the exception of those that acquired such properties in violation of the legal system and the international law. But we compensate them. So I think that at the end, and I hope that this demand, like the others, are going to be disestimated. Let's hope so.
Let's hope so indeed. I hope you're right. Maria, we are running out of time, so we're going to try and whiz through the last few questions in as little time as we can. We have about 10 minutes because we started slightly late. We have a question about the United States and the blockade and the United States response. Jimmy Keenan from Scotland has asked about the blockade and how the United States is responding today, particularly with the new Biden administration. And also we have someone from the United States, I think they're called Son Gohan, who has asked about the proposals from Senators Amy Klobuchar and Jerry Moran, who have put forward a bill to improve trade relations or to allow exports from the United States to Cuba. So there's a number of moves in the United States from legislators and the public to try and see a better relationship. But could you say a little bit about the first 5 months of the Biden administration and how that compares to the Trump administration? Has the policy changed in any way? And are you hopeful that it will in the future?
Well, Rob, unfortunately, we cannot be optimistic. Up to now, after 5 months in the administration, there is no change. It is clear that during the campaign and even after, President Biden promised to review the policy, the U.S. policy towards Cuba, but up to now, nothing has been done. And on the other hand, all the measures and restrictions imposed by the former administration, the one from Trump, remain the same and are applied fully against the Cuban people. So again, we don't feel optimistic. Let's see, because Biden, for instance, has, at least 2 prerogatives that he could use himself. One of them is to, put an end, the activation to the Title III of the Helms-Burton Act. And the second one is to withdraw Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terrorism. But he had doing anything. Nothing had happened. So again, we are not optimistic. We just have conveyed not only to the current administration, but to all U.S. administration that Cuba is open for a normal relations and civilized relations between the 2 countries. Just we request respect.
Thank you very much. I mean, we've been working ourselves to try to get the message across to President Biden that the world does want to change, and we worked with some members of parliament in this country, and I'm pleased to say that 58 members of parliament, led by one member of parliament, Graham Morris, who's the chair of the all-party parliamentary group on Cuba, they all signed a motion in the British Parliament calling on President Biden to improve relations and maybe follow some of the examples of other countries like Britain, which has good relations with Cuba. I mean, we could do more, but Britain does have respectful relations with Cuba. And Graham Morris has also written directly now to President Biden, calling on the US to change its policy. But I think if people around the world can join in those efforts, all efforts to press the US administration are welcome. We had another question in advance, specifically about the United Nations. It's from Joe Brumwell, and he asks about the United Nations vote and wonders why, despite the fact that 187 countries voted against the blockade, and only 3 countries, the United States, Israel, and Brazil last time round voted to maintain the vote, why that isn't binding, why that vote is not binding. And people often ask that, why, if the world votes against the blockade, does the blockade continue? So what's your response to that? Why is it that the UN vote seems to make no difference? And also, why does Cuba put such a big effort into its campaign at the United Nations on this issue?
Yes, Robert, you are right. And I think that is legitimate for people to ask. I think that the blockade is a kind of act of aggression, and the UN was created precisely to avoid this kind of aggression. And then the international community believed that it needs to send an unequivocal message to the US government and to the US politicians and people that this kind of policy goes against international law, the UN Charter, and should stop. So I think that it is true. Unfortunately, the resolutions adopted by the General Assembly are non-binding. It means they are not mandatory, but they encompasses a very strong moral message, because the General Assembly is the most representative and democratic body in the United Nations system, in which all member states have a voice and a vote. So for Cuba, and as well as for the international community, it is important to send this kind of moral, strong message to the US government. On the other side, it shows the isolation in the eyes of the international community, the isolation of the US government in its genocidal policy against Cuba. Rob, it's not only about the resolution or a vote. The picture is bigger than that. It's the whole process that accompanied that exercise. I just can mention, normally at the beginning of the main session of the General Assembly, it takes place a general, what we call general debate, which is a high-level segment debate, in which delegations are represented at the level of heads of state and government, minister, prime minister, and a high-level personality. Well, in this context, there is around 40 heads of delegations that make clear statement calling for the lifting of the blockade against Cuba. And this is very important because put this item, I mean, the elimination of the blockade against Cuba among the most relevant topics that are mentioned in the context of this high-level segment. Also, during the consideration of the resolution, there is only one negative statement, the one from the US. The rest of the world that speaks during the exercises of the voting supported very strongly the lifting. And I think this is really important to send this message. And besides, it's also a recognition to the tireless efforts of the Cuban people, to their resistance in the struggle against this kind of policy. So that my comments on this issue.
Brilliant. No, you've explained it perfectly, and I think part of the whole process is also the build up to the vote and the work done in every country around the world to talk to campaigners and politicians and trade unions and civil society to ensure that each country understands the blockade, as we're doing here tonight. And if people follow the United Nations vote, you'll see the contributions from so many countries in support of Cuba's resolution, and they're detailed and thoughtful. And I think it shows it's not just a vote, it is much more than that. It's an understanding across the globe that the world truly is against this cruel and inhumane blockade. And I want to sum up with the last couple of questions now. There is growing pressure around the world against this blockade. And I wanted you to perhaps talk a little about some of the actions that Cuba takes or national governments take against the blockade, but also a bit at the same time about what friends can do around the world. People like ourselves, solidarity campaigns, trade unions. We had a contact from the group who are watching tonight, No Embargo Against Cuba, who have hundreds of thousands of followers. And Addis Liddon asked a question about what can we do as campaigners to help in Cuba's battle against the blockade in the build up to June and generally.
Yes, Rob. The struggle against the blockade goes far beyond of the UN context. We have been talking about this context. Goes beyond. You can find every year, all the solidarity movement around the world, social organizations, parliaments, governments, political parties. There is a huge campaign that fight together with us to defeat or for the elimination of such a cruel policy against Cuba. You can see it everywhere and goes far beyond the UN because, for instance, you can find in the final documents of a group of countries like the Non-Aligned Movement or the group of 77, which encompasses more than 100 countries. They are final documents, they are statement always. There is a paragraph and a strong message calling for the lifting of the blockade against Cuba. The same in the community state of Caribbean state, CARICOM, also the African Union, since 12 years ago, has been adopted every year in the context of the summit, a resolution condemning the blockade against Cuba. So we have this kind of solidarity. We have people like Europe and millions others that are together with Cuba, that are supporting Cuba in all fields. So also inside the United States, you mentioned some of the draft law that have been introduced in the Congress. There are several examples of that, of congressmen, congresspersons in the United States trying to break the blockade somehow. And also organizations and in general, a huge number of the American people, and also my dear colleagues, or my dear, how to say it in English, well, Cubans that live in the United States also push for that. And we really thank you for, Rob, for asking me that kind of question, because it gives me the opportunity to express, and I'm sure I'm talking about on behalf of not only the Cuban government but the whole Cuban people, to express our profound gratitude to all friends of Cuba, to all solidarity campaigners for your permanent support. And if you ask me how or what to do, I would like to say just to encourage you to continue supporting Cuba, to continue denouncing the cruelty of the U.S. policy towards Cuba, and to continue pushing on the U.S. government to lift such a criminal policy. And thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Maria. Well, something that's coming up this weekend is the continuation of the monthly caravans against the blockade, which are happening across cities across the United States and across Britain also. And if you want to get involved in those public protests about the blockade, either this weekend or on the 20th of June, when we'll have a much bigger campaign, caravan against the blockade. You can find out details about those on our website. There are actions up and down the country coming up. So Cuba Solidarity Campaign, Maria, is very proud of the role that it's played, its small role, and it's thanks to our membership and our affiliated organisations. There's around 4,000 members here and 500 affiliated trade union organisations and political parties. And it's because of them that we're able to carry out actions such as the lobbying work in the British Parliament and across civil society. If anyone watching here tonight, and I know there's nearly 150 of you been watching tonight from across Britain and across the world, if you want to join the campaign, if you're not already a member, we would very much urge you to join the campaign. If you join at the moment, you get some free gifts, you get a free bag, a free badge, and of course you get Cuba C magazine 4 times a year, a wonderful magazine explaining about all the different elements of the blockade and the work that we do here. You'll also be aware that because of COVID, it's been difficult for us. We're normally out and about festivals, at trade union conferences, campaigning for Cuba, and also getting people to join and donate, and it's been very difficult. So if you can't join, or if you're a member and you're able to donate to the Cuba Solidarity Campaign to help us in our work, that would also be really gratefully received. And we're not talking lots of money. We want lots of people to give little bits of money to help us keep up with the campaigning work. And thank you, all of you who are involved in the campaign, joining the campaign, helping the campaign in any way. We have the third and final part of our meetings on the blockade coming up on the 28th of June, when we'll look back at the UN vote, and we'll be able to report back on some of the speeches, the contributions and so on. So do sign up to our channels and our newsletters so that you can be informed about that meeting on the 28th of June. Finally, I'd like to thank our very special guest, Maria del Carmen from Havana. It's been really wonderful, Maria, to meet you tonight and to speak with you. It's been very illuminating, and I think you've answered all the questions brilliantly. And we will carry on with our campaign. We want to see the end of this cruel blockade, and together I'm sure we will one day do that. So thank you so much, Maria, for joining us tonight, and I'm sure we will meet again. Thank you to everybody who's watched tonight. Do share this meeting, do sign up to our YouTube channels, and all of our meetings that we've had in these series. I think we've done about 15 meetings over the pandemic such as this, and they're all available on the Cuba Solidarity Campaign website. So I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight from across the world. Thank you once again to our special guest, María del Carmen from MINREX. Thank you all, and I hope you are safe and well, but thank you so much for attending tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rob, and again, it has been a great pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you and to others that are listening to our conversation. Just one last